Chris and I went out scouting for this week's Sunday school. The problem was that we were out in the middle of nowhere with not much around, but we were determined, and as we continued to drive, we spotted something off in the distance. So we pulled over as quickly as we could, we parked the car, we grabbed our gear, and we headed out on a foot race across the street, whipped out our gear, got set up as quickly as possible. What we were looking at was this really cool, lonely tree way off in the distance, and behind it were these super cool little baby rolling hills, or at least from where we were standing, they looked like baby hills. But as you can see here from this aerial shot, there wasn't really anything else around. And if you look off in the distance way back there, this is where me and Chris were standing. We didn't have a lot of time. We had to act quick because the road that we were standing on didn't have much of a shoulder, and it was a really busy street. Luckily for us, we had already locked in our minds what we wanted to shoot, so we were up and running in just a matter of minutes. Now that my vision was done, the next thing was to set up the composition. But the problem that I was facing where I was standing was that the posts for the vine lines were perfectly aligned with the tree, and it was becoming a little bit distracting. So what I needed to do as I was playing with the composition, and as I realized that these posts lined up with the tree, I knew that I needed to take a step to the left, or even a couple steps to the left, in order to get the composition set up and get that post away from that tree. Another thing I should mention was at this point, I wasn't really sure if I was going to keep the foreground elements and the vine leaves, or if I were going to get rid of them. If I decided to keep them, I didn't want that post lining up directly with the tree. So thinking ahead, I made a decision to move to the left. Another thing I was trying to do was figure out how much space I wanted to give myself above the little mountaintops that were behind that tree. I knew I didn't want to crop the top off, but I wasn't sure how much more space to give it. So I played around with that just a little bit, found what I was looking for, and was ready to go. Now that I had the spacing correct at the bottom and the top of the tree, now it was about to get the composition for the tree just right. And so what I did was I moved it to the left-hand rule of thirds, and that seemed to work just fine. The last thing that I wanted to consider, just because at this time of day it was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon and the sun was still high in the sky, so I wasn't really getting as much dramatic light as I would have liked to. So already in my mind I was thinking about photographing this or processing it as a black and white. So I switched my picture styles in camera to see what this would look like in black and white, just temporarily, just to give me some vision. But I'll make my final decision inside of Photoshop, and that's where we're going to head next. Okay, so I've taken this photo from Lightroom directly into Photoshop. Now I knew right away that this was something I was going to have to do, because I've worked with Lightroom enough to know that most of the creative edits that I was going to want to do to this photograph, it just isn't possible to do inside of Lightroom. The reason for that is because, with the exception of a clone stamp tool or a healing tool, which is really good for removing, little things, it's not really good to do massive edits inside of Lightroom. So I pretty much just decided to start all of the edits, even my base edits, directly inside of Photoshop, since I was going to end up here anyways. So here's where I started with the original photograph. This was the one that we decided to choose, but you can see in the foreground there are lots of sticks from the wine grapevines, and so I had to make a decision whether I was going to keep that or not. In addition to that, I noticed that the image itself was actually crooked. If you look at the horizon line here, it's actually going up right over here on the right hand side. So I knew that straightening this image was something I was going to have to do. And then as well, I wanted to decide what type of crop ratio was I going to put on this photograph. For me, when I first saw this photograph, as we discussed earlier, the thing that I loved was the tree and then the repeating patterns of the mountains that were directly behind the tree. I wasn't too crazy about all of the stuff that was going on up here in the background, and therefore I knew that I was probably going to crop this down as much as possible without cropping into the mountains, as you can see here. So that was really important. In addition to straightening and cropping, I also need to address all of this dirt that's down here, and then go ahead and clean up other things like the fence line and these little critters back here, and maybe deal with some of the background that's going to be left over even after the crop. So with all that said, the first thing that I did was straighten and crop this photo. If you go from the original to the straightened and cropped version, you can see that I got rid of quite a bit of it. This made for a nice long cinematic feel. It also gave me the opportunity to put my horizon line on this lower third and then, or whatever tree it is, off on the left-hand rule of third, which was pretty nice as well. In addition, by cropping it, I have a lot less problems to fix, which makes the editing process that much easier as well. After straightening and cropping it, the first thing I needed to address was getting rid of all of these spots that you see highlighted here. So after removing the spots, you can see a quick before and after. Already the picture looks much better with the crop and those distractions taken away. The next thing we needed to do was go ahead and fill in all of the dirt area, which I've gone ahead and taken care of using a various options, things like content aware fill or content fill or patch tools or clone stamp tools. There are a lot of options inside of Photoshop for dealing with things like this. It takes time, it takes patience. That in itself, filling in the dirt, probably took about 30 or 40 minutes just to get that done. But now that most of the big heavy lifting is all done, now we're ready to get into the creative process. Because this tree was so far away, there's a lot of atmosphere in between my lens and this tree, which is creating some haze. Not to mention the time of day is also adding to the haze. So luckily for us, we have my favorite feature, which is the dehaze tool, which I did inside of Adobe Camera Raw. But if you look at the before and after between the filling of the dirt and now the dehaze slider, you can see that it surely did cut through the haze. But as a result of that, there's definitely some color correcting that needs to go on. The back of the image is very blue. As you can see, all of this bluish tone that's going on in here. We need to address that. So I've added a little bit of color correction, again, a before and after, you can see, to take care of all of that blue coloring that was going on there. And then after that, I just wanted to add a little bit more contrast and color contrast to this photograph as well. So we go from a blue dehazed image to correcting the color to adding in some contrast. So now this photograph is beginning to take shape. From here, I'm going to add in a little bit of creative edits. And once I was done with this, I needed to make a decision whether I wanted to keep this photograph as vibrant and colorful as it is. But in my mind, the color is still a bit distracting. I don't know that I'm getting the color tones that I want. And I don't know if that's due to my own creative process or if just there's too much green and not enough of anything else to separate the color. So everything seems to be the same shade of green, and I'm not sure that I'm feeling that. So I'm going to go ahead and convert this image to a black and white. And this was actually something we talked about during the shooting process. And already I think that removing the color and just looking at the shapes and tones of this photograph look way better. So now that I've decided to go ahead with that as an option, now what I'm going to do is go ahead with playing with those tones a little bit more. As well, I'm going to clean up the background. I'm going to check the edges in the background. You can see that there's a lot of spotty things happening in the background, and that definitely cleans up that background and draws more attention to the front of the tree. After checking my edges and pulling out all the tones, the last thing I'm going to do is sharpen. And then lastly, the one thing that will probably throw everyone off, I'm going to go ahead and flip this image so that the tree is on the right hand side. And the reason for that is because here in the US we read from left to right, and so now I've got a leading line going from the left hand side all the way to the right where this tree is, and now I think that ties this in just perfectly. And that's it. I think we're done. A lot goes into the making of these Sunday school videos, so if you like this video, show your support by subscribing to our channel. Go ahead and smash that like button on your way out too. Thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you guys in the next episode.